after the Klal Yisrael conquered the Eretz Sichon and Og, the Transjordan side. So Torah tells us that Shevet, Gad, and Ruvain, because they had an enormous amount of cattle and livestock, they come to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, "We'd like to stay here. We don't want to cross the Yarden to go into Eretz Yisrael. We don't want to." Because there was a tremendous amount of grazing land on the Transjordan side. So Moshe Rabbeinu initially did not understand what they meant. He had thought they said, "We're going to remain here. We're not crossing the Jordan to fight with our brothers to conquer the land." So afterwards, they clarified themselves. No, we'll cross, we'll fight, and we will even stay longer. Initially, Moshe originally said, if you cross to conquer the land, 7 years is enough. They said that we'll stay there, not only for conquest, even to divide the land. So they stayed an additional 7 years for the sake of Klal Yisrael. But the condition was that their portion is on the Transjordan side, Ever Yarden. And why did they want it? So Torah makes the point because Mikna Rav Oilem, they had a tremendous amount of livestock, and they needed the grazing land. We find by Reuven and Gad, originally they said, we will build barns or corrals or pens for our cattle, and we'll build houses for our wives and children. Then after Moshe Rabbeinu says, you have your priorities mixed up. The first and foremost are your families. After your families, you talk about your assets. He says, first you build for your home, for your family, the homes for your family to protect them. Then we talk about arranging a situation for your cattle, for your livestock. But originally, initially, it already, as they say, the cat was out of the bag, even on the subconscious level, that the priority was what? Was their money, their wealth. Our difficulty, we find that when we read about the story of Beno Slavhod, who were granddaughters of Yosef HaTzadik, it says they were from Shevet ben Menashe ben Yosef. So over there, Rashi makes it a point. What's there to tell us that Menashe was son of Yosef? We know Menashe was son of Yosef. In the story of the Beno Slavhod, so Rashi over there cites Chazal that Beno Slavhod, the reason why they came with the claim was Hayu Chavivus Haaretz. They had a special love for Eretz Yisrael. And why did they have this special love for Eretz Yisrael? Where did it emanate from? Because we find that Yosef had a special love for Eretz Yisrael. Because before he passed away, he adjured his brothers to take an oath that Halisim es atzos mizayetchem. When you leave Egypt, take my remains with you, because I want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. From that we see that Yosef had a special love for Eretz Yisrael. His granddaughters, Beno Slavchad, from Shevet Menashe, that's what Torah is identifying them as Bnei Menashe ben Yosef. The reason why they're coming with this claim, because they have the special, overwhelming love for Eretz Yisrael, because they descend from Yosef HaTzadik. That's what the Torah identifies Menashe as ben Yosef. Okay? Now, in last week's parasha, when it speaks about giving the Transjordan side to Reuven, Gad, Chatzi Shevet Menashe, who received it? Originally, who made the request? Who wanted to be on the Transjordan side? Reuven and Gad. Menashe wasn't even part of the equation. They never made the request. Moshe Rabbeinu, based on what Hashem says, Menashe should also be there. Only half the tribe. Half the tribe on the Transjordan side, half the tribe was in Eretz Yisrael. The question is why? They never asked for it. The answer is because Menashe would be a positive influence. The Ramban writes because Menashe wasn't driven by money, and therefore it was there to somehow be a positive influence on Reuven and Gad. So over there, when Hashem says you give it to Reuven, Gad, V'chatzi Shevet Menashe ben Yosef. You understand? He's identified. What is ben Yosef? It's the same question. It's Menashe. We know Menashe is ben Yosef. You know what the answer is? Really, Menashe, the entire Shevet belonged to Eretz Yisrael. But why did he put them there? It's not because they shared common values with Reuven and Gad. The reason why they put them there was why? To be there, to be the positive influence on Reuven and God, because they were material driven. We'll see in a moment. As a result of that, we identify. Otherwise, it's categorizing Menashe in the same category as Reuven and God, but they're not. Because how's it possible? If Menashe is Ben Yosef, so what are they doing on the Transjordan side? They don't want to be there. The answer is they're there for Reuven and God. They're not there for themselves. Therefore, the Torah over there identifies Menashe Ben Yosef for that reason, as it identifies the Bno Slavchod as Bno Slavchod, then Menashe Ben Yosef for that reason that they were Chaviv in Esaoris. That's what I understood why it said it there. Now, the measure says like this over here. Omikna Rav Hoil Reuven God. There was an enormous amount of livestock which the Reuven the had. Ilamdenu Rabbeinu is in Parshas Matos, Posakei, in mentioned on Chuma. Ilamdenu Rabbeinu, Kama Matoros Libubam. How many gifts were created in this world? Gifts. Kalshan Rabbi said, Sholom Atonos Bora Kodesh Baruch Hu. The three special gifts which Hashem created in this world. What are they? Chochma, Gvura, V'osher. Wisdom, power, physical strength, and wealth. Wealth is material wealth. Zoch echod lechod, man, if one merits that Hashem endows him with one of these gifts, no del chemdes kol. You've taken the most precious asset of the world, even one of them, because each one of them is special. Zocha b'chochma, zocha b'kol. You merit wisdom, you merited everything. Zocha b'gvura, if you merited a special physical strength, we'll see in a moment, zocha b'kol, you have it all. Zocha b'osher, zocha b'kol. You merit this special level of wealth, also zocha b'kol. You merited everything. Ein mosai, now this is the punchline. When is it you were zocha b'kol? B'zman she'maton shamayim. When the gifts from Hashem, ubos mikoch ha'gvur shel Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the reason why it's given to you is because Hashem fully endows you in every aspect of that gift. But the power, the physical power, and the wealth of the human being, we'll see in this one, it's meaningless. It's not everlasting, and it's not really viable. Shlomo tells us in Koheles, Shavti v'ro'o tachsa shomish. He says, I've sat and I've observed what exists in this world under the sun. Even though people have alacrity, but they don't have what it takes to be there first, to succeed. And the ones who are powerful, they don't necessarily have victory in war. And people who have tremendous wisdom, they don't necessarily have what to eat. And even those who are insightful, who have these phenomenal capacities, they have wealth. This we read this on the Torah on Tisha B'Av. A person should not pride himself in his wisdom. And the powerful person should not pride himself in his physical strength. And the wealthy person should not pride himself in his wealth. What should the person who wants to pride himself? And what should he pride himself? That he has an understanding and he knows me. That he has a relationship, understands who I am. That's what you should pride yourself in. That's what you pride yourself in. Because the whole idea is everything is predestined. The only thing which is not predestined is Yodo Osi, is knowing Hashem and being subjugated to His will. That's Hakobi Deshim puts me Yerushalayim. That's Bechira. Bechira is not predestined, as the Gemara tells us. Tzaddik v'Rosha is not predestined. Every other aspect of a person's life, it's already pronounced even before conception. These gifts, the three gifts are what? Wisdom, physical strength, and wealth. If it doesn't come from Hashem, ultimately it's going to come to an end. Listen to this. The two wisest people who existed in the world. Echad miyisrael v'echad mi'Yisrael. One was a Jew, one was a Gentile. Achitofel miyisrael. Achitofel was from Klal Yisrael. Achitofel had plotted to kill David when David's son wanted to actually overthrow him. And then afterwards, ultimately, Achitofel was Bathsheba's grandfather. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin. Ultimately, he committed suicide. When Avshalom wanted to plot it against his father, Bilam mi'umas olam, Bilam from the nation, he was the Chocham of the nations of the world. Shneim avdu min ha'olam hazeh, u'min olam ba. They both were taken out of this world, and they have no share in the world to come. Shnei gilborim avdu ba'olam. They were two physically powerful people, the most powerful people in the world. Echad mi'Yisrael v'echad mi'umas olam. Shimshon mi'Yisrael, Shimshon ha'gibor. The Goliath mi'umas olam, and Goliath from the nations of the world. Ushneim avdu min ha'olam. Both of them were destroyed. Shimshon was stored with the Plishtim, and Goliath was killed by David. Shnei Ashirim amdu ba'olam. The two wealthiest people who existed in the world, who are they? Echad mi'Yisrael ve'echad mi'umas olam. One was a Jew, one was a Gentile. Korach mi'Yisrael. Korach was the wealthiest Jew who ever lived in the history of the world. V'Haman mi'umas olam, and Haman of the nations of the world. Ushneim avdu min olam, and both of them were removed from the world. Lama. The question is why. This is it. Because the gift they had, each of these gifts, were not from Hashem. What's in the order? Shimshon, he was born with this enormous superhuman strength. How do you mean he wasn't from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? HaKadosh Baruch Hu endowed him with it. Well, it's going to explain this. What does it mean it wasn't? A person is born with an IQ which is beyond anyone's understanding. It's an endowment. They took it for themselves. When Hashem gives you something, if I give you working for a company and you have all the capital in the world to use for the company, that's not called embezzlement, although you make every decision how you want to invest it for the company. But if you take that money and you pocket it, that you're taking what was given to you and you're misappropriating it. These people were given gifts, but chotfu, they put their hand in the till and used it for themselves. They took it for themselves. Of course, it's an endowment, a divine endowment. They were very, very wealthy. And they had tremendous herds and flocks. And they valued their money, their material. And because they valued it, they're willing to pass on Eretz Yisrael and live, relatively speaking, in Chutz La'aretz. Every Yardi does not have the exact same status as Eretz Yisrael. Because if they would have utilized the money and understood it was there only to facilitate Kavod Shamayim, they would have been considered not going to Eretz Yisrael. But because they took it for themselves, it was misappropriated. Ultimately, we'll see in a moment. When Sanchev came, the 10 lost tribes, the first tribes to be taken was Reuven and Gad. As it says in the Pasuk, he sent them into exile. These took the tribes that are on the Transjordan side. And what caused it? What caused them to be the first ones to be exiled? They separated themselves from their brothers. If all your brothers, all the Shvatim are crossing the Yarden, how do you separate yourself? Well, for the sake of the money, Bishvil Mikneim, for the sake of their flocks and their herds, that's where they separate. That was the priority. And that was revealed originally when they said, we're going to make barns and corrals and pens for our animals, then we'll build houses for our children. Moshe Rabbeinu says you got your priorities mixed up. First, you worry about your families, then you talk about your assets. What was the cause of this? Because it says Mikne Rav Hoyu. So because that was chotfu. What's chotfu mean? Of course, wealth is an endowment. But if you take it, you misappropriate it, that's called you grabbed it for yourself. And when you grab it for yourself, it doesn't continue. Okay? That's the understanding. Now, So what I said? I had it was like a light went on this morning. We're going to read in Parshas Kisovo that every year you have to bring Bikurim. Bikurim, where are the Bikurim from? From the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael. And you bring a gift, and then you make a declaration. What's the declaration you make? You make the declaration, you say, now I'm bringing the first of the fruits of the earth. Hashem nosateli Hashem, which you gave me. Yeah, I'm bringing it from the land, from the earth that you gave me. So there's a discussion in the Yalkut. What about, do you bring Bikurim from Ever HaYarden? You hear this? Do you bring it from Ever HaYarden? So Rabbi Yossi says, you don't bring it from Ever HaYarden. Why? Because it says, when the declaration is, the land, the earth that you gave me, to exclude Ever HaYarden, Shalok Chumiatsu. Because the Abraham, they took it themselves. Hear this? So I asked the question, what then? What did they took it themselves? The whole story of Moshe Rabbeinu. They went to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Hashem says, if they cross the land and they cross the Jordan, and they conquer the land with their brothers, they have it. So Hashem endowed it. So what do it mean? Shalok Chumiyatzma. Hashem didn't give it. You know what it means? It means exactly what we're saying now. Lok Chumiyatzma means the chotaf. The gift was, if they would have understood the herds and the flocks were there to do the will of Hashem, they wouldn't have separated themselves from the brothers. They had the self-interest. That's called chotfun. It's Adam Hashem Satali. Where does Hashem want you to be? In Eretz Yisrael, together with your brothers. So why did you choose to be in the Yarden? That's chotful atzma. And that's the reason why they were the first ones to go into Golus, for that reason. So originally I understood, the way I explained it until I saw it this morning was, Hakaras HaTov, to be appreciative is not so simple. How many people are really appreciative? Appreciation is referred to as a debt of gratitude. Who wants to be a debtor? Shlomo says in Mishlei, Eved lo v'lishmalveh, that when you borrow money, you're literally a slave. You're indebted to the lender. Who wants to be a slave? You don't want to be beholden to anybody. I prefer not to be beholden. That's the understanding. That's the reason why people, when it comes to be appreciative, to feel you have a debt of gratitude, they'll always somehow see it through a lens, you did it for yourself. Of course you gave me a bonus. If I wouldn't be a rainmaker, would you give me a bonus? I should be appreciative. You may even have a claim that the bonus wasn't large enough, because what you brought to the company, you deserve more. So instead of being appreciative, you even have a claim. And that's what we find among people. Everybody has their own way to process it, as long as they're not going to be debtors. They don't want to be indebted. The only mitzvah that is, it's an obligation to express your appreciation, only one, the mitzvah bikurim. Once a year, you bring the fruit of the land, and you say to Hashem, and you recount everything Hashem did for us, and you say, and what is the clincher? This is the fruit I'm bringing from the land you gave me. Say, you gave it to me. If I wouldn't have taken the initiative and been aggressive and asked for it, would you give it to me? You wouldn't give it to me. As a result of that, I attribute it to myself. Of course, Hashem allowed it. But why did it happen? Because I took the initiative. So to be appreciative at this level, where it's absolutely clear it's not related to you, every other thing is not simple. That's the way I explained it until now. That's the way I understood it. But with this chazal, it's chotful atzmo. Adam Asher Satali means there's no misappropriation. Reuven and Gad, when they took this wealth, that they separated themselves from the Klal, that's chotful me'atzmo. They took it for themselves. Hashem didn't want that. Hashem didn't want them to separate themselves from their brothers. You chose. If that's the case, that's not a gift of Hashem. It's only the gift that Hashem gave you, and when you chotek, when you grab it, that's not Hashem Satali. That's the understanding based on this midrash.
Why did Menashe have to be, so to speak?
Why do you have to be a culprit here? Why do you have to be a victim?
Right. Why do they have to be? Yeah.
Okay. There's a question which Rabbeinu Bachi asks in Chumash Devarim. I think it's Parshas Kitzitz. I haven't seen it in many years. Hashem is Hoyehoviyah. Why did Hashem, if Hashem knows, why did ultimately Hashem create the world? The Rav Kalatsky explains this. Because Hashem, being the source of all goodness, he wants the person, the human being, to be the greatest beneficiary of good. And the ultimate good is having a relationship with him. So you have to be worthy. So therefore, you have to go through all the challenges of life. And if you succeed and you meet the challenges, you merit a share in the world to come. That's what life's all about. So Rabbeinu Bachya asks, Hashem is in the future. He knows the future. He knows that tzaddik is going to succeed. So why does he have to put the tzaddik through all the trials and tribulations of life? Ultimately, he knows the tzaddik is coming out on top. Let the tzaddik go straight to the world to come. The whole idea is because you have to go through the challenges. And Hashem knows that tzaddik is going through the challenges. He knows he's going to succeed. The Russia, Hashem's it's not going to punish someone unless you cross the line. So the Russia has to come into existence because he has challenges. But Hashem knows he's going to fail. It doesn't make a difference. But until you fail, you're not held accountable. So the Russia has to come to existence for himself. But the tzaddik that God knows ultimately that he's going to prove himself. Why drag him through all this muck and this mud over here and all the difficulties of life? That's Rabbeinu Bachya's question. So why did Hashem bring the tzaddik into the world? It's not for himself. Could you imagine you have a world only Rishonim? The whole basis for choice is you have representation of good and evil. A person now is on the middle road. Now he has a question. Is the right the left or is the right the right? He has a choice where to go. But let's say the whole world will only be Rishonim. The man doesn't change. The positive influence doesn't exist to influence him, even to consider the right, to be a tzaddik. So the tzaddik is here. The tzaddik's not here for himself. The tzaddik is here for others, that he should be a representation of good. So when they make a choice, that should be considered part of the choice. You understand? That's why the tzaddik is here. So the tzaddik, in terms of his own value, he deserves immediately, not even to come into existence. So the tzaddik even gets extra credit. Why does he go through all the difficulties of life, the suffering, all that, to show the others that despite everything, he's willing to toe the line and meet the challenges despite all the difficulties of life? That is what he represents. But Hashem knows it. Hashem knowing it doesn't help others. So he's here as a representation, as a model of what a person is supposed to be. So Menashe was put there not for himself. So Menashe is put there to get almost extra credit. Menashe is Mechavi V'Soretz. As it says, he was. That's why I pointed out that's just called Menashe ben Yosef. If he's ben Yosef, what is he doing on the other side of the Jordan? He belongs in Eretz Yisrael. The answer is not there for himself. Hashem put him there for Reuben and Gad. That's why he was put there. But ultimately, he was influenced. And because he was influenced, as a result of that, when they went to Golus, who were the first ones to be exiled? Reuven, Gad, and Chatzit. Why? Because since they grabbed it, because it's not something ultimately which they should have asked for. How do you separate yourself from your brothers for the sake of money, for wealth? Therefore, you're the first ones who are going to go into exile for that reason. To say, person goes into outreach. Go into outreach. So he used to say, in Europe, and you see pictures in the Middle Ages, you have people with chimney sweepers. You ever see a picture of a chimney sweeper? He had a long, like a 15-foot brush, and he'd go into the chimney, he'd clean out the chimney. But what did the chimney sweeper look like? He was covered with soot. He says he may clean the chimney, but he was covered with soot. When you go out there and expose yourself to the world, unless you're like an Avram Avinu, you come back with battle scars. You are influenced. You're out there, you're exposed to a negative culture, values, and beliefs. You never know what it could do to you. You may not have the same intensity of belief and fervor that you had originally. Because why? Because when you go out there and you expose yourself, although you're doing it l'shem shamayim, you never know what the consequence of that would be. how you can be worn down and diminished for that reason. So he said it's not so simple. You have to be a special person to go out there. You have to be a well-weathered Talmud Chacham, Ovid Hashem, to go out there. And when you come back whole. Otherwise, you go out there, it's not so simple. You're coming back whole. You come back literally, chas v'shalom, a paraplegic, spiritually speaking. You could come back, and many people do. They don't come back the same people, because they really, as they used to be an expression, they wet behind the ears. When they went out there, it's just not a rah-rah. We're going to influence, and you're excited. You have to be qualified to go out there. If you're not qualified, you may become a victim of your own good intention. That's what Mashgiach used to say. I didn't think I'd see your countenance, your face. Now I even see your two children. We find Reuven and Shimon, Ephraim and Menashe, assumed the status of Shvatim, of tribes. Ephraim, Menashe grew from Shimon Yili. They were grandchildren. Yaakov says, the children that were born to you in Egypt before I came to Egypt. What does he have to give us the whole introduction? We know they were born to him before. The answer is, how could Yosef father children of such spiritual dimension, which they're not under the influence of Yaakov? You know what the answer is? Because Yosef is Yaakov. Therefore, even though he's in Golus by himself, like Yaakov was by love and all himself, he raised a special family. Yosef had that same ability, and therefore he was able to raise Ephraim and Menashe to be no less than Yaakov's children. And that's what he's saying. The children that were born to you before I came to Egypt, Ephraim and Menashe. Therefore, Ephraim and Menashe grew in Shimon. That's where they're going to be the equivalent of tribes. But so initially when he came to Egypt, he says, I never thought I'd see your face. What does he mean? He didn't believe, but he had to see for himself. What do you have to see for himself? You may be alive, you may have all this power, but are you the same Yosef that when you left? Were you that same Yosef? Are you the same Ben Zukunim, Ben Chakim? Are you that same Yosef? When he saw him, he was the same Yosef. He was ecstatic. But he had to make that evaluation himself. Because being in Egypt all yourself for 22 years, you may not be the same person. You may be a tzaddik or whatever it is. But the tzaddik that you could have been originally, you're not that same tzaddik. And that was Yaakov's evaluation of Yosef. And therefore, as a result of that, he said, the children that are born to you, that you raise them no less than I raised my children. Therefore, Ephraim and Menashe takes on the status of Shvatim for that reason. That's the way how I explain the Ramban. Ramban, he says, Sefer Hazeh in Yona Yodua Shu Mishnah Torah. He says, Sefer Dvar is known, it's called Mishnah Torah. It's a review of the mitzvahs that were previously stated, plus a few others that weren't. Yevarbo Moshe Rabbeinu, L'dor HaNichlas B'oretz, Rov HaMitzvos, Atzrichos L'Yisrael. He will explain and elucidate the majority of mitzvahs that Klaus will need in the future when they go into Eretz Yisrael. Lo Yaskabel Dvar Torah, B'Torah Kohanim. Torah's Kohanim, it's interesting. If you're reviewing the Torah, why don't we speak about Karbanos, speak about the laws which pertain to the Kohen, who he's permitted to marry, he's not permitted to marry, he's not permitted to contaminate himself, all the laws. That's not reviewed. Lo b'maisa karbanos, lo b'tyrus hakohanim, u'b'maseyim. Not regarding the laws of Karban, not regarding the state of purity, and their actions, what they're permitted to, what they're not permitted to do. Shekvar bir osam lohem, because the Torah already says it earlier. So why for the others do you repeat everything, and for the Kohanim you don't repeat it? V'akohanim's reason, lo yitztorchu la'asoro achasoro, because a Kohen in his innateness, he does things with alacrity. That means there's a certain level of cognizance that a Kohen has due to his spiritual makeup. It's not necessary to repeat it. As a result of that, that's the reason why the laws pertaining to the Korban and to Torah and to their actions are not repeated. Av Yisrael, Yazir HaMitzvos Hanogas Ben B'Flik. Ordinary Jew, they have to be repeated. Pam L'Hoset Ben Biur, sometimes to give it a greater level of understanding. Or Pam Shlo Yazu Oson, Rak Lahazir is Yisrael B'Rov HaSoros, just to forewarn them. A human being is a human being, and we have slippage. We slip. We go back. K'moshivar b'sefer hazeh binyonei avoda zora asoris bruba zu ahuzu b'tochochos. we speak about avodah zarah, prohibition is repeated many times. Because a human being with this certain vulnerability to avodah zarah. V'kol pchodim asher yafchid osam b'chol oche haveros, and all levels of punishment mentioned to put the fear of God into us. That's why it's repeated many times. But the laws which pertain to the Kohanim, because Kohanim are rizimim, they do things with alacrity. There's always that cognizance that a Kohen has that others don't have. It's not necessary to repeat it. So what I once said, if you remember, we discussed in the past, we find that Chazal come up with certain understandings, which are a basis for making the fence, not making the fence. For instance, if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar. If the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, we don't take the lulav. Now the question is why? So the Gemara says, we've discussed it, because we're concerned that to do the mitzvah, a person may not be adept in the mitzvah. He may transport the shofar in public domain, violate Shabbos. He may transport the lulav, violate Shabbos. What do they come up with the concern? Say, well, Chazal made an evaluation that it's possible, therefore, we're empowered to make fences, although you're not going to fulfill the Doraisa, Torah law. So they came up, but we know they didn't come up with this themselves. The Torah already is alluding to it by saying Zichron Shua, right? When on Rosh Hashanah it says Yom Shua and Zichron Shua. So Mara says, why does it say Zichron Shua? There's a day that you only remember the blast, but you don't actually actualize the mitzvah. What is that? Rosh Hashanah is b'Shabbos. Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. So what is the Torah telling us? You know why? Because there's a concern Shabbos may be violated. So the Torah already is giving us that insight, Chazal, the insight that there's a basis for concern here. And what is the concern? Shemi Aridalos B'Shazorabim. So Chazal didn't come up with this, their own understanding based on the valuation of a human being. The Torah is already alluding to it, that this is a weak point. As a result of that, it's up to you to legislate defense or not legislate defense. That's Zichron Shua. And therefore carries over to Lulav, carries over to other things. How did Chazal, the Gemara tells us many times in Shas, that regarding Kohanim, Chazal did not legislate Gezerus, fences. And there was this why? Because Kohanim is reasoning. How did Chazal know? Because Kohanim is reasoning. Because they observed their behavior. You know how we know Kohanim is reasoning? Because when we come to Mishnah Torah, all the laws which pertain to Klal are repeated, but the laws of Karbonis and Tyra and all the laws pertaining to Kohen at a personal level are not repeated. Why? There's only one answer. Kohanim's reasoning. So it's extrapolated from the Torah, their understanding why the Torah does not repeat it. That's how they understood the profile of what a Kohen is versus the rest of Klal Yisrael. That's what we see from the Ramban. If Purim is Friday, Yudalit is Friday, so when are you supposed to read the Megillah in a walled city? Tesvav Shabbos. But you don't read the Megillah on Shabbos in Yerushalayim, even though it's a walled city, you read it on Friday. For the same reason, you may transport the Megillah. It's Gemara Megillah. Okay? So Tosei asks a question. If a child is born on Shabbos, you circumcise the child on Shabbos. Why is the concern that the Moel may transport the Ismol? We rule like the Chachomim, that Machshir Milah Nadocha Shabbos. That whatever facilitates the mitzvah Milah doesn't supersede the Shabbos, only the actual Milah itself. So if that's the case, let's be concerned. A Moel, a person has the knife, and he may go take the knife to be taught how to do circumcision. Why is that a concern? By Lulav it's a concern, by Shofet it's a concern. So Tosa says that the only one who does Milah is only the expert. Nobody's going to allow a person who's a novice to do Milah on his child, you understand? So the only one who's going to do Milah, he's not going to be taught how to do Milah. Lulav, Shofar, a person will go, even though he's a novice. But Milah, as though the concern doesn't exist. That's the reason why there they didn't want legislative fence that the child born on Shabbos should not be circumcised on Shabbos for that reason.